Yeah, so for the ones that still don't know us, we are Flaconi. We are Europe's leading online retailer for beauty and fragrances. And for the ones that had the chance already to hear yesterday, Bastian, our CEO, speaking, you know that at the core of our success story during the last years, there is the right mindset and really a relentless focus on execution. A relentless focus on doing the things and doing the right things and doing them maybe a little bit better than some of our competitors. And I think the topic that I brought you today is a good example of that. So what we do with customer feedback, I think, is a bit more focused, is a bit more detail-oriented, and is, I think, an important driver for our success and for our growth over the last years. So when I talk about customer feedback, what do we mean by that? Of course, there's many ways in which your customers can voice their feedback to you. We talk about, for example, any kind of customer satisfaction survey that you might have. We're talking about product reviews. We're talking about reviews of your shop on other platforms such as Trusted Shops, Trustpilot, and all of these platforms. And of course, your customers will also give you feedback, towards your customer service, for example, or they will voice feedback on social media. So this is all the topic that we are talking about here. And if you look at this customer feedback can be many things. It can actually be quite insightful, like this feedback that we got from our Net Promoter Score survey, and that helped us understand that maybe it's not a good idea to pack multiple glass candles into one package and expect them to arrive without breaking to our customer. Yeah? And then, of course, we revised our process here. We're packaging our candles better now. Problem solved, and another pain point for our customers resolved. So this is, the, I guess, insightful example. But also, customer feedback can be much more. It can actually be quite, touching, I would say. It can be quite emotional. Like this message that we got here from a 90-year-old customer that said, thanks to Flaconi, I am able to still give gifts to my wife, which I think is a beautiful message. And, for all of us, I think gives a certain kind of meaning to what we're actually doing every day. But really, most of the time, and in most companies, customer feedback looks more something like that. It's one of many numbers, one of many KPIs that is somewhere buried in some kind of dashboard. And as long as the number is like in more or less the right range, nobody really bothers to look at it. Nobody really bothers to question what is happening there, and nobody really bothers to dive deeper. And this is a problem. The result of this is really this kind of numbers. Anybody knows these numbers? It's basically two sides of the same topic, of the same perspective. So the 85% is the share of companies that were asked in a survey that think they provide an excellent customer experience. And the 8% is the share of their customers who think that these companies are providing an excellent customer experience. So you see there's a massive disconnect between the reality that the company is in and the reality that the customers really are experiencing. And the most frustrating part about this is all the information is already there. Your customers are telling you what they want. Customers are very vocal. Of course, there's a lot of difference between different cultures, different, let's say, personalities. You can see a lot of differences, but customers will tell you one way or another what they need, what they want, and what they expect from you. So the data is there. The data is there in your customer satisfaction surveys, in your customer service interactions, on social media. It's all there. But companies don't really use that data a lot. They rather treat, the collection of feedback as like a checkbox exercise, and, we collected it, we file it somewhere, we leave it there. And that's not good enough. Because what if this feedback could be your key to unlock previously untapped growth? What if you use this customer feedback and really take it seriously, it could bring you to the next level and it could fuel your growth journey? and can actually become your biggest competitive advantage. But what is the problem? What is usually keeping companies back? In my experience, there's quite a few things, right? And I'm sure many of you will collect, some kind of customer satisfaction metric. Yeah? You will have maybe a net promoter score survey. You will have some other kind of metrics, and they will be collected somewhere. But are you really translating these signals into actions? Oftentimes not. And in my experience, there's 4 different reasons for why this is not happening, for different challenges around really translating feedback into action. The first one is what I usually like to call the data trap, right? So you might think you're doing everything right? You're collecting data, you are ingesting your customer satisfaction survey, your product reviews, all of it into your data warehouse. In an ideal world, there's maybe a nice dashboard about it somewhere, but that's where it stays. Maybe somebody looks at the numbers, maybe not, but certainly there's no actions from these numbers, right? So your data is, somewhat trapped actually in your systems, and you don't really bring it to action. The second challenge when it comes to activating your customer data and your customer feedback is really going beyond the what, right? So meaning, okay, you look at your data, you want to do something with it, but you usually stay on a more descriptive level, right? So you see, okay, maybe our customer satisfaction moved 5% this month. That's nice, right? But do you know why? Oftentimes not. And also because it's not easy, right? Because the answer to this question is usually not in a number and not in a graph, but maybe more in a conversation. The third challenge is caring but not sharing, right? So you do have a dedicated team, a dedicated department that works on these topics, that looks into customer feedback, that understands customer feedback even, but then it stays there, right? So maybe they have genius insights about what your customers want, but they're not sharing it with the rest of the organization, and they're not acting on it. And then, kind of stays there. And last but not least, and I think this is usually the biggest blocker, is what I call the hidden costs, right? Because of course we're all very busy. We all have a lot of things to do. So the question is, why bother? Why should I look into my customer feedback? Why should I do something with that? Because behind this assumption then is the failure to realize that not interacting with your customer feedback actually comes at quite a significant cost. It means customer being constantly dissatisfied, customers constantly churning, customers not coming back to you. And it also means that probably in many areas of your companies, you're working on things that are not even that relevant for the customers. So you are losing revenue, and also you are creating additional costs that might not even be necessary. And I think this is the fourth important part here to consider. So, lots of problems. What do we do with this? How can we solve this? How can we tackle this? What we did at Flaconi about 3 years ago, when we started to look seriously into customer feedback, is we started with our strategy that was also developed back at the time. This is our current strategy. You see in the center the title of the strategy. It's called Beauty in Your Pocket. So it's very much a mobile-first strategy where we want to be a trusted beauty advisor that is always with you, that is always on your phone as a customer. And you see, the foundation of this is really, I would say, the e-commerce basics, what we call a 5P. So purchase, promotion, product, pricing, and most importantly, people and mindset. And then we have a couple of focus areas that we work on to, of course, achieve ambitious financial goals and realize our vision and our mission. And now when it comes to customer feedback, you see here on the right-hand side this pillar that says already explicitly customer experience, right? So when we were developing the strategy, we were very aware that, of course, customer experience is a relevant part here, and especially influencing these two focus areas that you see on the right there, right? So retaining your customers, making sure they come back with you and that they want to keep interacting with you, of course, means that they need to be happy and that they need to have a great experience. So, based on that, we sat down and thought, okay, how can we consistently and continuously create a great customer experience based on customer feedback? And we came up with something that we call the feedback loop. It's basically a 5-step iterative process that we repeat on an ongoing basis, and that helps us to consistently not only understand our customers' feedback, but also drive it into action. And the first step, unsurprisingly, is listening. No? Ask and listen, as we call it here. And this has really two components. The first one is, I think, the traditional one that you would think about usually, what I would call passive listening. So this is, the customer feedback that keeps coming in via your customer feedback, customer satisfaction surveys, via social media, via interactions with your customer service, and so on. But also, equally important, and we will see later why, is a more active listening approach, right? So actually talking to people, talking to your customers, but also talking to people who are not your customers, and trying to understand why in focus groups, for example, in individual customer interviews, in something that you might call like a customer advisory board, something like that. Yeah. So active and passive listening here to collect a lot of feedback. Then we have the second step, getting to the why. Right? So really understanding from what you see in the customer feedback, not only what is happening, but also really why is it happening? What are the underlying reasons? What are the underlying motivations? What are the maybe frustrations and emotions that your actions and your service provokes with your customers? And here, of course, I think the crucial part is really to have a good interaction between technology and human understanding. Because of course, if you have a sufficient size, and are collecting a lot of customer feedback, at some point you cannot really analyze it anymore as a human being. And there, of course, AI, for example, is a great tool, right? Every standard chatbot will be able to generate you, the top 5 problems if you feed in a big file of all your customer feedback, right? So you can very easily identify the most problematic areas, the biggest challenges that are in your customer feedback. But then make sure to also sit down and have a look at it with a human perspective and a human understanding, right? Because it might be that in the feedback it says, well, your checkout process is confusing. But what does that really mean? Does it mean that your checkout process is bad? Or does it mean that customers find it confusing because you're not giving enough information in it? Because you're not communicating in it? So I think it's always important that if you get these insights, you manage to have a look at it and question it and try to understand what is really behind it. What really is the why behind this given feedback. Then, number 3, communicate and discuss. Yeah, and this is really 2 topics in one, and they're both really important. Discuss is, again, really about gaining a deeper understanding, because if you or your team are looking into customer feedback, you will encounter issues that you don't really understand fully or that you cannot contextualize fully yourself. So for example, if you see that customers in a certain country are complaining about slow delivery, then you can assume that something is wrong, but you might not know what. And then what we do, for example, is we go to our colleagues that steer our carriers in the different countries and we talk to them. And maybe they will tell us, well, look, a pallet of the packages got lost or got delayed on the way to, let's say, Italy. And then, you have the full information. You understand what happened, and you understand, why you received a certain feedback based on that. So that's the discussion part. But equally important, in my opinion, the communication part. So taking the things that you learn from your customer feedback and bringing them into the whole organization. So not only into the areas that are directly related to customer feedback in general or to the specific topic that you're working on, but really into the whole organization. Because that will help you to develop a more customer-centric mindset in the whole organization. And that sounds very abstract, but I can give you a very practical example. Since we, in our monthly all-hands meeting, started to present always some of the insights from our Net Promoter Score survey, a lot of people actually come to me every month and ask questions about that. So they see the changes, right? And even if they have nothing to do with customer feedback in general, they come to me and ask, hey, why did our score in Poland change? And I found that amazing, right? Because it really shows that even if it's not part of their job, even if it's not part of their daily work, they really think about these things and they consider them. And they consider their work also to be influential on the customer experience and on our customer feedback. And it really is. So much on the third phase. Then, of course, you want to bring the insights that you have into action, right? You don't want to stay on the level where you describe and discuss, but you really want to act on them. And this is here what we say, what we call experiment with insight, right? Because oftentimes what you do in e-commerce is, you do like an A/B test of, the color of a certain button because, you have a gut feeling that the other color might be better. Or maybe you at least found like some kind of theory or scientific explanation why, the new color might be better. But the really cool thing about customer feedback is you have a much higher likelihood to be experimenting with the right things and with things that are driving impact. Because your customers already told you what they want and what the issue is, right? So if you take something from customer feedback and do, an A/B test with it or try it out in a new campaign, you have a much higher likelihood to succeed. And ultimately that helps you to allocate your resources and your money and ultimately in a much more efficient way. And then last but not least, we of course want to close the loop, right? Because otherwise it wouldn't be a loop. So 3 things about this. First of all, of course, we want to review what we saw in phase 4 in the experimentation, right? So we have a look at the results. We see, was that actually going into the right direction? Do we see the reactions that we expected based on the customer feedback that we received? Or do we need to try again? Do we need to iterate on this topic a little bit more? Second component of closing the loop is, of course, you keep doing all of that, right? You don't do it only once, but you define a certain, I think, cadence to look at customer feedback regularly, right? So we do look, for example, at our Net Promoter Scores on a daily basis, but then dive deeper on the underlying topics on a monthly basis. So define a certain rhythm, a certain cadence in which you look at things. And the last part of closing the loop, and this is something that I'm actually very excited about and I would like to work on more at Flaconi, is really communicating back to our customers. Because they took the time to tell us something that they think we could improve on. And I think it's only fair to get back to them. And also, I think it's a great opportunity to create a more human, a more trusted relationship with our customers, right? So something like, thank you for sharing this feedback with us. We did now this and that and try to fix what was bothering you. Here you can check it out again. This is, I think, something that can be very powerful when you want to build trusted and loyal relationships with your customers. So that as an overview of how we do it at Flaconi. And I thought I'd make it a bit more tangible for you by bringing a specific example. And the example is very specific to our industry. Most of you will know, from shopping for fragrances, you have these wonderful little samples that you might get if you buy a fragrance online or also in a physical store. And by listening to customer feedback, we actually managed to understand the relevance of this topic for our customers much better than we would have otherwise. And our journey began when it came to samples, with the first step when we started out as Flaconi, with the assumption, okay, We are selling a great assortment of amazing branded products online for great prices, and they come to you within 2 working days. Customers cannot possibly expect to also get, free samples with that, right? Of course, we were wrong. We actually saw, of course it worked in the beginning, right? But our NPS scores back then were more mediocre, I would say. And we received repeated feedback of customers that were saying, hey, I'm used to that if I buy a fragrance, I get samples with that. And so we thought, okay, let's do samples, right? So the first iteration was we introduced 2 free samples with every order. And the result was actually quite impressive. Yeah? We saw quite a jump in our NPS score, about 10 points up. And we saw much higher satisfaction of our customers. But again, the whole thing is a loop, right? So we go through it again. We keep collecting feedback, and we keep hearing the feedback that customers want to have a choice, right? They don't want random samples. They want to have a certain amount of choice and of influence of what kind of samples they get. And so we had a second iteration where we built a feature that you can see here, where customers can select samples, right? They can select either 2 free samples or 1 specified sample, or they can also select that they don't want samples. And of course, this is great for many reasons, right? You see there's, of course, a quite clear retail media opportunity in there. There is the option for, let's say, the more sustainably minded customers to say, no, I don't want samples. And so a lot of great things here. And we saw again, when introducing this, a quite significant uplift in customer satisfaction. But of course, we keep listening. Yeah? And of course, customers keep having wishes around samples. Now, mainly around, getting the right samples that fit their gender, right? So, for example, men don't really like to receive female fragrance samples. And on the other hand, customers, I think, are rightly feeling that, if they spend a high amount of money, if they spend a few €100 on fragrances, maybe they should get better samples. So this is something that we are working on right now to be a bit more personalized and a bit more individual when it comes to giving out samples. And I think there's a lot of potential in there. So I think this example shows quite nicely that, something that maybe you wouldn't even consider in a traditional e-commerce logic can be quite impactful in driving customer satisfaction and driving ultimately customer loyalty, of course. When you look into your customer feedback and really identify these topics, and then, of course, act on it. So, what does all of this mean? I think what I want you to take away is really the thought of this as quite a significant transformation. Yeah? It doesn't have to be a big thing. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money, but just the mindset shift from, traditional like e-commerce optimizations and like small things and hoping that something works to a clear and focused experimentation with the insights that you have from your customer feedback, I think is quite a transformation. And of course, if customers, feel heard, if you develop the right things, they will keep coming back to you. And this is also what is happening for us at Flaconi here. You see our net promoter scores for the last years here. And for those of you who are familiar with the net promoter score, you know that about a score of like 40, 50 is already considered a good value. So these are extremely high values. In fact, if there's anybody in the audience that knows a company that has a higher value, I would really like to meet them and I would really like to talk to them. But yeah, you see, by focusing on doing the right things, we were able to constantly increase the net promoter score over the last years. And actually, my personal highlight was that in the Cyber Week of last year, we, I think, had for the first time a company-wide NPS score of 86, which honestly I didn't think that was quite possible. But of course, customer satisfaction is not a purpose in itself. That translates into different things. Translates, in our case, to over 75% of customers coming back to us. And it translates, of course, into quite a significant growth journey where, over the last 3 years, we grew from a little bit over 2 million active customers into 5 million active customers. So you see customer satisfaction, customer experience directly translates into loyalty and into, of course, more profitable revenue. So I want to leave you with a little bit of a challenge, right? So ask yourself, what can you do today already, maybe, to get started on your journey to activate your customer feedback? What can you do to drive a bit more impact based on your customer feedback? A few ideas, maybe go to one of your product pages, have a look at the last reviews there and try to understand, is there any underlying topic? Is there any why that I can find behind that? Or take a topic that you already know that your customers feel strongly about and try to experiment with it, try to implement it, try to make a small improvement and see what the impact is. Or more into the direction of communication. Create a customer feedback squad in your company, right? Bring the right people together from marketing, from customer service, from product, and meet once per month and discuss the topics that you learn from your customers. And you will see that will have quite an impact. So that way, customer feedback will stop being a boring to-do and will actually start being a growth driver for you in the future. And I thank you for now and hope you enjoy the journey to that.
Wie ist eigentlich die ganze Struktur hinter diesen ganzen Kennzahlen aufgebaut? Auf welche Grundlage werden die ganzen Kennzahlen gesammelt und wo und wie werden die ausgewertet?
Yeah. Can I answer in English though? Can I answer in English? Yeah, good. So the question was, what's the infrastructure behind that at Flaconi? Actually quite simple, right? So we are trying to keep it manageable and not transition to the big, customer feedback suites. So we have a provider, Zenloop, that we are very happy with when it comes to collecting a Net Promoter Score feedback. We have a different provider for collecting product reviews on our page. And ultimately, all this data does end up into our data warehouse, and we can take it from there. But honestly, I think the process of looking at the feedback itself, like I said earlier, is actually quite manual to a degree, right? So we do try to really look at the numbers ourselves and discuss the numbers. Yeah? So we have providers for collecting the data, but analyzing and discussing is what the human work there is.
Question on the NPS versus the financial metric. So do you suggest to see NPS as an additional metric to steer or kind of like take in certain parts even over the financials? And for instance, when you do an A/B test, let's say the outcome is the NPS rises and the costs also rise, let's say, and revenue slightly increases or slightly decreases, or essentially kind of where there's a conflict of interest between the different metrics. How do you proceed in that case? Of course, NPS is a kind of revenue driver, as you said, but how do you, maybe you can expand on that a little.
Yeah, good point. I think first of all, I would really love for all of us to talk about NPS much more. I think, if you try to do research and try to see, which company has which NPS, it's really hard to find out. And I think it's an important metric to talk about much more, very much alongside the financial metrics that you mentioned. Nevertheless, of course, we are not here for charity, right? So the ultimate goal is, of course, to increase revenue and ideally increase profitable revenue, which most of the time really goes hand in hand, right? As I explained. So usually, if you have a higher satisfaction, a higher NPS, that leads to more loyal customers coming back, and that leads to more revenue and also more profitable revenue. In reality, what we don't do when we do tests or A/B tests, we don't look really down to metrics like profitability, right? Because usually that's not seriously possible, unless you want to do some very weird things when it comes to attributing costs and so on and so forth. So we do look into NPS and revenue, of course, and that usually goes hand in hand, luckily. Yeah, but of course we wouldn't do everything to make our customers happy, at the risk of our financial results.